It's really good to be here, and thank you, Forset, for inviting UNDP Accelerator Lab to be part of this amazing event today. And we're really proud to be partnering with you and other organizations to make this event happen, both offline and online. And this is really exciting because this is the first event over the 2 years that I get to speak physically. And I'm really excited to be here today. During my presentation, I'd like to draw your attention to the COVID-19 database communication campaign and how Accelerator Lab uses data to harness some of its goods and communicate with the broader public some of the information that we have around COVID-19 vaccines and their usage. Before I go into the details of the communication campaign, for those who don't know information about the Accelerator Labs, I'd like to mention that we are part of the global network, and right now 92 labs are operating across the world, sharing the information, generating the knowledge, and sharing this knowledge with each other, so that we're not just a local lab that produces information locally, but we're also part of the global network where we are sharing the information that we produce or sharing the information that we find out with the communication with the local population, grassroots organizations, governments, and etc. The way we work is the reason why the Accelerator Labs were created is because we need to adapt to the changes quickly. And the way Accelerator Labs are operating is bringing the different type of approaches into the way development is done globally. So we try to do horizon scanning so that we understand what trends are coming up, what's next, where should we look for, what solutions should we identify, create, what kind of inventions do we need, and so on. So this way, Accelerator Labs do not have any specific topic that they have to work on, but rather have a broader mandate to work on all SDG goals. Therefore, we are not limited with a function, but rather we are entitled to accelerate the achievement of these SDG goals, because we all know that pandemic already put us into the challenge that some of these goals may need more attention and more resources to be achieved by 2030. And the Accelerator Labs, to give you the information regarding the pandemic, one of the key points where the Accelerator Labs stepped in were the experiences where some of the labs created applications, for example, to deliver information on COVID cases, COVID updates, some of the vaccine information, also 3D printed face masks, and so on. So we were there to test some of the approaches and also to experiment with the new things that sometimes traditionally are not done in the development field. So that's why we decided to think about the support of the vaccination and uptake of the vaccines in Georgia. And when thinking about what we can do differently was the data. What data was lacking around the Georgia that people were interested in, but were not skilled to obtain or were not easily accessible to them. So we decided to run data-based communication campaign where we were using trusted sources to communicate better with the broader public on social media. The campaign was not huge, but we can say that achievement was quite impressive. With only $12,000, we achieved to reach 1.2 million Georgians, which is the third of the population. And we only used up to $300 for advertising and for boosting the information. So we can say that most of the information that was spread around the social media, both in Facebook and Instagram, were naturally spread across the media and with an interest of the social media users. So we created different types of factographs, infographics, videos, and so on, and all of them use data to communicate the important points around vaccination. What we wanted to do is not only nudge the uptake of the vaccines, but also help our citizens to make evidence-based decisions. I'm not going to share the exact details or the communication materials that we elaborated, because we can, if you are interested, we can share the whole folder with you later on. But rather, I decided to share some of the lessons learned from this communication campaign, so that if we or you have the data-based communication campaign or maybe other types of communication campaign, you could keep this in mind. So one of the first lessons learned is that negative data attracts a lot of attention. And here you see the posts prepared where it's shown how many people were we lost due to COVID on a specific day, and it is compared to a specific village, and the information says that 48 people died today from COVID. This is the exact number of population living in Nunisi, for example, and this way we were trying to communicate that if this pace and this trend continues, the Georgia will just empty out. And in the mind, we were trying to create in the communication campaign that you would be imagining that the whole village just vanished in just one day. So this information attracted a lot of attention, and a lot of people were sharing this information, and it had the reach of 100,000 social media users. So this was one of the most popular posts that we created that was spread out. So the second lessons learned was that sensitive information attracts more people and is more engaging. Here we covered the topic of side effects of the vaccines, and probably many of you know and have had this conversation with your relatives or friends that who had like what kind of side effects, how they felt, and so on and so forth. And sometimes this is one of the main reasons why people don't get vaccinated, because they're afraid of these side effects. So we showed that only 0.03% get the side effects, and they're even gone in a few days. And also we decided to touch base on the vaccination among the pregnant. So these topics received a lot of attention, and even like the comments around the side effects reached 150, which was one of the highest number of comments we had during the communication campaign. Also, we found out that we spent a lot of time working on different visuals, and some of them were quite simple, while others were complicated. We spent a lot of time, energy, resources, and but they did not have as good reach as the simple ones. So one of the lessons learned is that one-pagers work better. And here what I mean is that these two simple facts demonstrate what is the probability of getting the COVID-19 if you're vaccinated or not. And the second fact is showing the COVID-19 infection rates compared to the deaths in UK, where at that time vaccination rate was around 60–70%. So this information is easy to understand, requires just one glimpse, and it was widely spread, while other information, which is the complex factor graphic, where we decided to demonstrate who is willing to get vaccinated, why, what is the segment, what kind of people are willing to get vaccinated. For example, those who have had relatives or family members who had the COVID-19 complications and so on. We wanted to provide as detailed information as possible so that people could get make decision based on the evidence that they saw and the facts that they saw. But even though these two posts were posted on the social media, the one with a simple fact was naturally people uptook it like naturally, but the other one requires more boosting, more promotional funding and so on to reach the same level of interest and same reach within the social media. So these were the three main lessons learned that I wanted to share, and some of the challenges, because sometimes people think that when international organizations are conducting different type of communication campaigns, and they need materials, data, and so on, People think that we do have like a free access to all the information. However, we were still struggling because the data on in Georgian language is quite scarce, especially around the COVID-19 and the vaccines. Another challenge was that even though NCDC was our partner and they were doing their best to provide all the information we requested, their databases were not as flexible and required human interaction, human engagement to extract the necessary data, which took more time and required human resources. And a lot of people were approaching NCDC at that time to get the data, so that was also challenging. And to think about the social media campaigns, one of the things that we think that really limits the capability and reach of the social media campaign is who we can reach. So in Georgia, we have a big digital divide between the rural and urban areas. So through this communication campaign, because we were targeting the social media users, we were not able to reach out mostly in the regions and the most vulnerable at some point. Therefore, UNDP decided to launch in parallel that would continue this effort, another communication campaign, which would be a classic face-to-face communication campaigns where we brought doctors and influencers to the villages, and we also brought like vaccine vans where people could get their jabs right at the spot. So final lessons learned is that yes, online communication campaign works if you make it right, but at the same time we have to admit that in our societies where there's a big digital divide and we still need to reach people in the remote areas where the internet access is limited or the digital devices are not accessible, we still need to collaborate with the classical and traditional communication campaign. Thank you. This was all that I wanted to mention. So if you're interested to see all communication materials, because we've elaborated videos and different articles and so on, please reach out to me or Teona or anyone from Forset, and we will be happy to share the folder with the visuals. We do have videos in several languages like English, Armenian, Georgian, Azeri, so we could share them as well. Yeah, this was all I wanted to say. And since our session today will be related to how UNDP uses data or how UNDP uses new technologies to support the equity of the COVID-19 vaccines and what are some of the technologies that we use, I'd like to introduce and invite our next speaker, Andrey Krachkov, who is the data collection consultant at the UNDP, and he will be presenting the data platform, which is related to the vaccine equity. He will be talking about how this platform works, what is it created for, and what are some of the challenges that the platform and its developers face. Thank you, and I'd like to ask organizers to bring in Andrey, and Andrey, the virtual floor is yours. We're trying to bring in Andrey, and meanwhile, we will experience the COVID type of conferences in a hybrid format.
So while we are waiting for Andrey, maybe audience have some question we can take on, and
sure.
Then we can continue. So do you have any questions, guys? Because I was kind of involved in this campaign, so I know what happened. I have no questions.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. What indicators are you counted for detect the impact factor of the contagion? Is the increasement of the vaccination or how and which duration was calculated for count the impact factors? Thank you.
Thank you. So we started the communication campaign in May and finished somewhere in September. For the indicators, it was quite difficult to measure the impact of social media campaign on the rate of vaccination because this was not the only campaign running in the country, and there were in parallel many different types of activities related to the uptake of COVID-19 vaccines. In our case, we were looking at the indicators such as comments, shares, reach of the specific post, and we were also looking at how much money we are spending on boosting the specific post or advertising the specific post, while others were spread out across the internet easily without any contribution of the boosting or any contribution of the promotion of the specific post. So this is what we were looking at, and in final report, this is what we are outlining as well of the indicators of how many people we reached. We were also looking at the gender aspect, and one of the findings is that most of the posts are viewed by female. Male are more less active in this direction. We had this really strange comparison where sharing the video in English, Georgian, and Armenian, female viewers were almost like half of the viewers, while in the video where we shared in Azeri language, like dominant was male viewers. So that's also an interesting finding that we are looking at to understand why, what was the reason. So that's the different indicators that we were looking at. Do we have Andrey on the...
Thank you. Yes, we have Andrey. Hi, Andrey.
And thanks, Cecile, for introducing me. Again, I'm Andrey. I work as the data collection consultant for the SDG integration team as part of UNDP. I'll jump straight ahead because we've lost a little bit of time. And I'll start with why vaccine equity in the first place. So this was meant to be the decade where we take definitive action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that everyone everywhere can enjoy peace and prosperity. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has threatened to reverse a lot of the hard-earned progress that we've done on universal healthcare access, education for all, and gender equality. Its health and socioeconomic effects have also threatened to amplify previously existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. So this is why the importance of COVID vaccines cannot be overstated. As seen in high-income countries, with very high vaccination coverage, the provision of vaccines allows entire populations to take a breath of air from the roller coaster ride that the last 2 pandemic years have been. But as we already knew before the emergence of the Delta and the Omicron variants, the pandemic cannot be over until it's over everywhere. So this is why UNDP is working with the WHO and our partners at the University of Oxford in order to create a global advocacy platform which would make an evidence-based case for equity. And to do so, we will provide data-driven, actionable insights on how unfair vaccine access could hamper socioeconomic recovery and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So our objective is not only to develop a tool that will lay out what recoveries look like for different countries, but also what they could look like in case we were to move closer to a fairer distribution of vaccines. So unfortunately, the trajectories of vaccination that countries from different income level groups are traveling on are very different. So while high-income countries have been able to achieve really remarkable progress in terms of vaccinating a very good chunk of their populations, the vaccination campaigns in lower-income countries have struggled to pick up from the ground. So for instance, between September and December this year, low-income countries were able to distribute about 38 million vaccine doses. Meanwhile, in high-income countries, just the number of boosters that were administered was almost 3 times that. But what this graph and these numbers don't tell us, unfortunately, is what are the day-to-day experiences of people traveling on these different trajectories. How are their lives different because of their differential access to vaccines? And for us, this was the challenge to figure out and explore. In order to do this, we had to integrate data from a lot of different sources, which would allow us to understand how differential vaccine access shaped different development paths. So for instance, a few questions we were asking were, are countries which lack vaccines more likely to experience extended lockdowns? Also, what are the economic consequences of not being able to either afford or access the vaccines that a country needs? And what are the implications for the labor market? But also within a single country, are people in more vulnerable circumstances as likely to receive the vaccine as any other person in that same country? And if not, then what are the implications for their lives? So in order to answer these questions, as well as a few more, we decided to run the project on two parallel tracks. The first one is the global dashboard, which showcases multidimensional country-level vaccine data. It combines data on COVID epidemiology, such as cases, deaths, number of tests provided, with vaccination data, including on the administration of vaccines, as well as supply-related information on pricing and other affordability indicators. And this has allowed us to unearth and to tell those stories that will serve global advocacy and help national decision makers. The second platform is still under development, so I'll be speaking a little bit less about it today, and it's the hyperlocal vaccine analytics. We see this as a geospatial platform which would visualize socioeconomic indicators such as poverty, gender, and ethnicity, and we would combine this with COVID-specific exposure risks. So risks that would make certain populations within a country, so for example, within an area, more vulnerable to COVID. This may be lack of access to healthcare facilities or previously unsuccessful vaccination campaigns and patterns, and communication risks. In this way, we hope to enable both national and subnational level decision makers to make very highly granular decisions on who they need to vaccinate next. So a lot of dashboards were developed over the course of the pandemic. And in order to tell a complete story of how differential vaccine access shaped socioeconomic effects, we had to pull information from most of them. But even so, we had to devise our own survey in which to gather all that data, which would fill in the gaps in the previously existing publicly available data. This we did through the joint UNDP and Oxford survey. So I'll take you straight to the dashboard. This is what it looks like. I hope you can see it on your screens. This is a snapshot of what the Vaccine Equity Dashboard provides in terms of analysis. It allows both members of the public and policymakers to conduct three-dimensional analysis on how COVID epidemiology interacts with socioeconomic responses on the one hand, and in turn, how these correlate with vaccination coverage in any given country. It also provides benchmarks for countries to strive to in order to achieve certain global targets, such as the 40% global target set by the WHO for the end of this year. So this is how it works in practice. I've selected status of reaching 40%, the aforementioned target set by the WHO, and secured vaccines as a percentage of a country's population. All the countries that you can see, which are shaded in the dark purples and the dark blues, are likely to have secured enough vaccines in order to reach that goal. However, countries which are shaded in the darker reds have been able to acquire enough vaccines, but experience challenges in delivering them to their populations. Finally, these countries shaded in the light blues, such as here in the Sahel, may be experiencing both supply and distribution issues. So the insights that we've been able to gather from our dashboard are quite striking. While in high-income countries, almost 2 out of every 3 people have been able to get the jab, in low-income countries, this number stands much closer to 1 in 12, unfortunately. And the slower and delayed vaccination rollout in lower-income countries has left them vulnerable to both new COVID variants, to new epidemic surges, as well as a slower recovery out of this crisis. Bringing in all of this data has also allowed us to look into the challenges that countries might face in procuring those vaccines that they need. So one example is their affordability for countries of different income levels. We estimated that in order to vaccinate about 70% of their populations, high-income countries would need to increase their healthcare spending by about less than 1% on average. However, for low-income countries, this number stands much closer to a daunting 57%, which could mean that they would have to either accrue additional debt in order to finance them, or they might have to reallocate funds from other essential public services. Both of these could be quite threatening to their long-term sustainable development. Combining this multidimensional data has also allowed us to take a more granular approach and make predictions about the affordability of vaccines for individual countries. So if we were to look only at the very large scale picture, we might say that overall the procurement of vaccines for the world would cost about 0.1%. However, this misses a lot of information. As we might expect, for the very, very rich countries such as Ireland, Switzerland, and Norway, vaccines in relative terms are much more affordable than they are for India, for example. But there are also very big differences between countries within the same income level group. So for instance, for Burundi to purchase the vaccines it would need to vaccinate 40% of their population, they would need to spend in relative terms almost twice as much as some other countries within the same income level group, such as the Central African Republic and Sierra Leone. This country-by-country analysis allows us to provide the first step for an engagement on an international level, which would help the recovery of those countries that are most vulnerable. We have also been asking what the economic impact of having vaccines is. So while late 2020 economic forecasts suggested that the global economy would rebound in 2021, following the trajectories of individual countries has painted a somewhat more nuanced picture. So while high vaccination access in high-income and upper-middle-income countries has allowed them to make U-shaped recoveries, the economies in low and lower-middle-income countries have continued to contract. By combining economic forecasts with data on vaccination rates, we were able to estimate that the global GDP would increase by close to $8 billion for every additional 1 million people vaccinated. So for instance, what this means is that, for example, in February, if low-income countries had had the same vaccination coverage as high-income ones, their growth estimates would have been revised upwards by close to 1%, or $38 billion. Going forward, as I mentioned, the WHO has set a target for every country in the world to reach 40% by the end of the year. And unfortunately, very few low and lower income countries are on track to achieve this. If they were, however, we estimated that the global benefit for the global economy could well be in the trillions. And one final quick example on how the data from our dashboard can be used. We all know that COVID has had a very devastating impact on the labor market, and informal workers have been disproportionately affected by full lockdowns. So we wanted to explore this further, and we used data from our partners at the University of Oxford on the severity of lockdowns, which is what they call the Stringency Index. We combined this with vaccination coverage data to see whether vaccine access allowed governments to soften their socioeconomic restrictions. I suppose this was what we were all hoping for when vaccines first became available. Again, the results were quite striking. So as you can see, I hope you can see in these charts, climbing vaccination coverage was well correlated with economies and societies opening up, at least in high-income countries such as France, the UK, Israel, and the United States. This, however, was not the case for countries with staggering vaccination rates. As these charts show, when vaccination rates cannot lift off, governments seem to be forced to retain socioeconomic measures in order to prevent the exponential rise of infections. And this reduced economic activity is especially hurtful for countries with a very large informal sector, where workers might be less likely to be able to benefit from unemployment benefits or to be able to work from home, and they might be more reliant on daily wages. So this analysis allows us to provide national policymakers with insights on the most vulnerable subpopulations within the country, which would allow them to prioritize effectively and to mitigate some of the worst effects of this crisis, hopefully. This is all for me from now. I'm very much looking to speaking with all of you later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrey. Very interesting presentation, and indeed this shows very well what is the effect of COVID-19 on different countries and how low and middle income countries are struggling because we need to increase our spending by almost 60%, and access to vaccines remains still problematic, but at the same time, those countries that have vaccines are struggling to get enough people vaccinated. Exactly on this, as I mentioned, one of the roles that accelerator labs have is to identify some of the solutions around different topics. And one of the topics could be, what are the solutions that ease the burden of the pandemic, and how these solutions can be scaled across the countries, and how we as different countries and accelerator labs can share the knowledge that we create or we find out in different regions, in different countries with each other. And also what can be the benefits of social listening and how we can learn different lessons from the social listening. Exactly on these topics, and to demonstrate how accelerator labs work globally, I'd like to invite for our next speaker, Jeremy Boy, who is the Chief Data Scientist at the Accelerator Labs global team, and he will be presenting the information regarding the way Accelerator Labs are approaching data. Jeremy, please, the floor is yours. We can see you and the presentation is on.
Great. Thank you, Sesili. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we need to hear you better. Can you speak, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, this is much better. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I guess my presentation is going to move away a bit from the aggregate picture that we just saw, sort of, trying to understand and describe basically what the situation is, whether related to vaccination, whether related to just the spread of the disease and so on. I mean, we've seen these numbers, plenty of throughout the past 2 years. And I guess as Sesili was introducing, what I'm going to focus on rather is trying to understand what's bubbling up from the ground up, how people are reacting, basically, how people are building coming up with solutions, coming up with different ways of, coping with the different also social measures that are put in place around COVID. And so I'm going to talk to you about 2 work streams that we have that use digital traces to uncover, the potential that we have, considering our entire network of labs, and I'll come back and describe that a little more. To see it as a learning and sensory network. And so the 2 work streams, 2 different types of data. The first one is more passively generated data and how we can leverage this to understand or see the network of labs as a sensory network. The second one is more declarative data on a documentation platform that we built. So I guess I'm going to repeat and illustrate some of the introduction words that Sesili had describing the Accelerator Labs. Please excuse me, this is an old map. We went from 60 to now 91 labs. So the Accelerator Labs are public sector innovation, I should say rather, innovation labs that are embedded within UNDP country offices. And so here we have a picture of the 61st, we now have 31 extra. So sorry, Georgia is not on this map. And it's a very distributed and somewhat decentralized network. Decentralized in the sense that there's no sort of direct instruction on who works on what. Of course, this is all established within, with partners in the country office and local partners in the country, what the different labs work on. So this gives you a sort of distribution of the different topics that the labs have worked on in the past year. But what's interesting is that each lab, all the labs interact a lot. They communicate a lot on different channels that we have. We have, corporate channels like Teams, but then we also have more informal ones like WhatsApp, and we have sort of global exchanges happening on different WhatsApp channels. And this is really what I'm going to be talking about, using the passively generated data through these communication channels to understand and support from our perspective in the global team, and also learn from what's going on in the network. Quick note on how the WhatsApp channels came to be, because I think this is important. I mentioned it just a second ago, but the use of WhatsApp was emergent, basically. We have corporate channels like Teams, which are sort of imposed. This is where official communication between different labs and different parties in the network happens. But while all the labs were being onboarded back in 2019 and then again in 2021, I believe, this year, the teams put together, just different WhatsApp groups to be able to communicate between different roles. So each lab has 3 roles. Each role has their own WhatsApp channel and so on. So these are sort of emergent, bubbling up conversation spaces, basically, that aren't forced into one particular platform. And so what's interesting is that we get up to 300 messages per day on, again, 3 main channels. We also have, so these are in English channels. We also have equivalents in French. Some of them are in Spanish, but I'm going to focus on the 3 main ones in English. So this is to give you an idea of the volume. So it's a lot of information that comes in. Of course, it's on top of all your other regular emails, on top of all the other channels that you might have for communicating. And so what we've been doing at the global level is trying to, parse and unpack all of this volume of conversation to see, better understand, and better support what's going on in the network. And to give you an idea of what's being exchanged here, 3, I guess, random examples, but in one case, more sort of situational awareness. There's a typhoon going on in Southeast Asia. This is, to be aware of what the context of the lab is. Here, people asking for support on specific, internal procedures or helping country offices, in this case, build their country program documents. So asking for support from other people in the network. Here, sharing tools or, sharing knowledge that people have because they have just particular skill sets and so on. So this is a very, broad view of the type of information that's shared. So what we're trying to do is use this to see the network, to learn from the network, and to amplify the network. And I'll unpack a bit of all of this in the next few slides. But to do this, I'll give you a bit of a technical deep dive, not very deep, but so that you understand what's going on in the background. When we collect data from WhatsApp, it's actually my own data on my WhatsApp phone, so it's the information that I'm privy to. Essentially, there are 2 pieces of metadata. There's the name or the phone number of the person who sent a message, and there's a timestamp. And so by using the name or the phone number, assuming that we know where the name of the person or that person is located, we can go through, the wall of text that is an entire WhatsApp thread, and start to see what countries are participating in the conversation and to what extent. This is maybe interesting, but it's pretty limited. It doesn't really tell us what the dynamics of the conversations are. It just gives us a broad picture of, who's familiar and who's happy to say heaps of things on WhatsApp. So if we then look into the timestamps, and here you see an animation basically of the sequencing of messages, you start to see patterns of things that group, or sequences of messages that group into conversations. And so with some pretty straightforward modeling, we can actually cut up the entire thread of WhatsApp messages into distinct conversations. And so here, each bump is essentially a conversation on a given topic. And so just to illustrate here, probably an image was shared. We don't collect images for a number of reasons, but an image was shared with a caption, social distancing solution from Denmark, and people reacting to it. So why is this interesting? Because it gives us the ability to see the network, to see the dynamics of exchanges in the network. So in this case, we're not just seeing, that such country talks a lot on WhatsApp and talks a lot about subject A. We see that country A and country B are an interaction around a given topic. And of course, broader conversations is not just 2 countries talking one to each other, but we have a network of 91 labs, and it's often multiple countries in interaction. And so what you see here in this adjacency matrix is the overview of interactions between different labs. But then what's interesting is we can break this down according to specific topics. So with a simple keyword search for within each conversation, we get an idea of, and over time, of who is interacting with whom around a given topic. And so people, people in the network might not be explicitly delivering knowledge on WhatsApp, but them being in conversation with others who might be suggests that they're probably either interested or working in that space as well. So this gives us an idea of, you know, who's likely to be working in what space based on the conversation patterns that they have. So here in an example of waste management, we see overall that quite a few labs are in interaction. Looking at air pollution, here there are less labs interacting, but they interact a lot more together. And here sanitizers, maybe if I reload this picture, we can see it a bit better. Sanitizers, same picture or same idea, less labs interacting, not necessarily as frequently. There are 2 labs that are very much in interaction around this topic, or were in interaction around this topic over the past year and a half. Then the second thing is learning from the network. So if we have, you know, all of the different conversations or all the WhatsApp blocks of text separated into different conversations, we can start, you know, modeling topics around this. So this is very, very basic, you know, extraction of key terms. But we see, you know, conversations around probably contact tracing here, here about social distancing. And this provides us, you know, different entry points into trying to understand what the network is talking about, what the network is not only talking about, but really sensing. And then the last part is this idea of amplifying the network. So it's really twofold. The first part is pretty straightforward. It's feeding back all of this to the network. So if someone, you know, wants to join a conversation, wants to pick up on who's been talking about topic of interest, or what's already been said, they can go in and find that information. But also moving outside. And so here I'm going to illustrate with a small project that I did at the very beginning, I guess, of when COVID was declared a pandemic. So back in February, March 2020. The network, so people in our different accelerator labs were exchanging, you know, many different links of all types of sorts, whether news articles describing what the situation was in their country, whether talking about specific solutions that they had found, and so on and so forth, coming from, you know, people around them. And so by using this as a sort of initial sensory layer, what we did, or what I did, is take all the URLs that were shared and then branch out, go to those URLs, find the URLs that they were pointing to, and sort of, you know, snowball effect like that, to create a corpus basically of all the conversation, all the topics that were being published, again, starting with the sensory network of the accelerator labs around COVID at the time. And so what was interesting is that you come to articles like this that, you know, provide or discuss solutions, technological, in this case, solutions that were showing up very early on. Of course, of main actors, big international actors like the MIT here with their ventilator project. But then you also come across much more national, much more smaller scale initiatives, like here, a small startup in Chile, I believe, that was 3D printing personal protection equipment. And again, this back in February, March 2020. And so, of course, I mean, then you want experts to come in and validate whether these are, you know, relevant partners to have for an organization like UNDP. But the point is that it directs us to different actors, different partners than the typical big internationally visible, at least, organizations. But of course, this is, you know, these are all just entry points basically for us to understand and learn from the network. And so we're trying to diversify the different work streams, as I was mentioning. And so I'll show you a different platform that we've built where we're collecting said solutions, and I'll explain a little bit what we mean about solutions mapping. So this is very bluntly named our solutions mapping platform. It's a documentation platform for all of our heads of solutions mapping. So like Sesili here in the room, we have 91 heads of solutions mapping. Their role is to go out and find what people are doing, you know, in response to a given development challenge that they face. And so we're documenting solutions on this platform from across the world, from all of our labs. So we have, as you can see, over 1,700 solutions coming from, in total, 1,100 specific locations mapped by, again, our 91 labs. And these cover, you know, a whole range of topics. I won't go through all of them. We have 588 different topics. Some of them are, more or less related and so on. But the idea is that it gives us a very broad picture of, if we're interested in one particular topic, what around the world people are doing, at the grassroots level to address that challenge. And so if I go into very quickly the anatomy of the documentation of the information that we're collecting here, each solution, comes typically with an image, with a title and so on, and with a number of tags. And these are the thematic areas that, are open-ended, so it just keeps growing. And what's interesting is that each solution can have multiple tags. And so by looking at how solutions are connected by the different tags that they use, we can start to map out a sort of, create a sort of semantic map of how solutions are distributed according to different thematic areas. So here, all the dots that you see are individual solutions. On top overlaid are the sort of regions that correspond to different thematic areas. So of course you have this huge cluster in the middle. Then you have maybe a topic, a region around here, down here around food waste, new public services, and so on. So it starts to give you a picture of how all the solutions that we're identifying, can be mapped semantically according to different thematic regions in this case. And so if I go in and I look, for instance, for COVID-19 response, I'll find all the solutions that the network has mapped. And so it's interesting, we have solutions coming from Cambodia, from Iraq, from Algeria, from really all over, and very different types of solutions. So you might have, the more technological advanced solutions, like a robot here, probably to deliver things in ICU units, in ICUs, oxygen concentration devices and so on. But then you also go into more digital services to people and so on. And what's interesting is that with this starting point of COVID-19 response, we also get to see what themes come up together with that theme in the different solutions. So this begins to give us an idea of what are the sort of emerging trends, how is COVID and the political and social responses to COVID affecting different areas of society, and how are people responding to them? Because for each area that we have here, we have documented solutions of people trying to build things to support or to help them overcome whatever challenge they're facing. And so a different way to look at this is to look at the graph of all topics that are used in different solutions. So here I have COVID response in the center, and each link to a different circle. So here each circle is a different topic, no longer a solution, but a different topic. And each link indicates that at least one solution in the platform documents a relationship between the two topics. So what we can see very quickly is that coronavirus response obviously is related to health. We have a number of solutions that relate COVID to health. But then we have some, relating it to informality, to education, to youth. Livelihood seems pretty obvious. And the point is that this paints a very broad picture of all the different ways through, again, what our labs are picking up. So there is that initial sort of filter, I guess, or to some extent bias. But through what our labs are picking up, it gives us a sort of idea of how COVID is affecting, and again, the political and social measures taken in response to COVID are affecting different aspects of society, but also how society is reacting to it. So COVID response is also very much related to technology, to innovation, and so on. I won't go through all the different topics here, but the point is, as you can see, it's highly connected. And for each connection, just to illustrate it once more, so if I go maybe to the connection between COVID and technology, this is all, again, connected by different solutions that have been mapped that we can then go in and see, who are the partners that the accelerator labs have identified on these topics, and so on. So that sort of concludes what I wanted to talk to you about. I want to thank Sesili for inviting me at least here, and thanks to all the organizers. And yeah, I'll be happy to take questions in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Indeed, your presentation demonstrates that the accelerator labs are not just units placed in different locations on the map, but rather a truly global network where we learn from each other. And in the 21st century economy, everything is based on the access of data and the data that you can generate or have access to. I think the accelerator labs are really creating this database of the solutions that can be scaled across the countries and across the regions for the common good. So thanks again for the presentation.